What's up, humans? My name is David, and I help people develop self-awareness and self-compassion. And today, another Blue Chair Talks for you, another one in the series on the hemispheres of the brain and the very different takes on the world that they have. And this is a very important part of us developing self-awareness and self-understanding. And that's why I'm so excited to share some of this with you. I think a few times over the past few episodes about the hemispheres, I have mentioned that it's difficult to talk clearly about the right hemisphere. The right hemisphere, just sort of as a recap, is the hemisphere of the big picture and of constant in-touchness with really sort of the broadest experience of reality that you can have, On the other hand, by contrast, the left hemisphere controls, for most people, your right hand, your dominant hand, and is about manipulation, is about control of the environment. And today we are going to learn that the left hemisphere is about making things explicit, making things clear, making things defined. And again, I'm going to say this so many times over the next coming weeks, the next few episodes, it's about control, right? The left hemisphere wants things to be explicit and clear and defined because clear boundaries around things means we can manipulate them, right? Whether literally, physically, but also intellectually. Okay, so sort of a contrast kind of thing. Last week, we did the first super oversimplification, right? That almost sort of binary description of what the two hemispheres are about within us. So this is kind of another one. This is, I think, another one that I would put at the top of the list, like towards the top of the list. And that is this difference of the left hemisphere being about explicit, things being clear and defined, and the right hemisphere being all about the implicit. And the implicit is connected to the word implied, right? So when something isn't stated really clearly, it's only implied by what someone is saying. That's difficult to talk about, but that's what the right hemisphere is all about. So I have some kind of examples to try and just sort of clear this up to help us understand this, and ideally in the long term to help you start to see this in action in your mind, in your life, as these two parts of you sort of interplay. So one of the clearest examples that I can think of for something that is explicit is a dictionary definition. When you go to the dictionary, you look up a word, what it's trying to do is give a concise but clear and, as if possible, definite description of what's going on. But maybe you've noticed this. Sometimes words kind of fall short, or at least it feels that way sometimes in a really important and poignant way. We try to describe an experience we've had and we're like, man, I'm just not finding the right words, or we might even feel like words can't describe how good it was, or sometimes how bad it was, that your words somehow are falling short. And that's definitely about implicit experience and implicit knowledge and understanding, right? So this is a part of us. It's a part of our life experience, but it's harder to spot all of that implicit stuff. It's less obvious, right? This is closely connected to another sort of contrast between the two hemispheres that I think I will be making an episode on sometime in the future, but that's this idea of content versus context. The right hemisphere, that big picture hemisphere, is so huge on context, and it cares about it, it understands it. Left hemisphere is like, whatever, context, likes to ignore the context. It's easier to control things that way. And the left hemisphere then is all about content, But if we're exclusively focused on the content, for example, of language, man, we lose so much, right? Uh, Here are a couple examples. So if someone says the words, let's get out of here, that really is context dependent. I mean, really, all phrases are, but to sort of give a contrast here, uh, if you're a couple out on a date and things are just jiving really well, it's been a nice, luxurious evening out on the town or somewhere you enjoy, and one person in the couple looks to the other and says, let's get out of here. Whoa, that means one thing. Okay, cool. We've got that scene in our imagination. But what if, I mean, it could even be the same couple. What if one of them screams at the other, let's get out of here? And, I don't know, the building is crumbling. Context really matters. I don't know, maybe sort of silly example. Um, but hey, that's the kind of thing that our right hemisphere is always picking up on. So for example, if you walk into a place for the first time and you realize everyone in here has a different skin color than I do. Now, I'm talking a lot about race these days, so I'm not trying to make any particular point, except that as humans, we're very attuned to that. But for some of us, that might be something that remains as a sort of background awareness. But then for others of us, that's something that we'll actually notice really quickly, and that'll be sort of the focus or one of the main focuses of our attention. Skin color can be something that either is implicitly noticed or explicitly clear to us. And that can be different, and we can work on that, right? So another thing I thought I would think about, which I'm a little hesitant to because I'm not old, but I'm like 35, so I feel like I'm getting old. I'm a little worried that I'm going to use this young people term and like not really understand it, but I'm going to go for it anyway. And hopefully someone gets to laugh at me someday. Uh, this idea of vibing, I'm just vibing. That's maybe a little difficult to pin down, but I love this idea because I talk about the vibes of a place all the time. And what I am always referring to is that sort of difficult to articulate feeling about the place, right? You also have these words like ambiance and je ne sais quoi, interestingly, both from French, right? That are just trying to point to, hey, it's kind of hard to articulate all of what's going on, but that place feels good, right? This is our right hemisphere. I'm always worried that I'm going to mix it up and say the wrong one, and things will be even more confusing. Okay, so that is our right hemisphere, our big picture hemisphere, picking up on so many things that don't explicitly occur to us, but then just create an overall impression of that place, someone's house, an experience in general, right? Oh, good vibes. So when people say, man, I'm just vibing, like that paints a really cool and very interesting and frankly compelling picture to me that is saying there isn't an explicit goal, a stated and overt purpose for what I'm doing right now. There are, of course, maybe subconscious goals when someone is just vibing or says to someone else, I'm just vibing, you know? But yeah, I love that. It's a not very clear, not super explicit way of being or way to spend your time. um, okay, another place where this shows up is poetry, and maybe this will be sort of my final contrast. But if you if you try to understand a poem as if it were a dictionary definition, you're 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 missing it, right? uh, that's not the poetry thing. or else all of our books would be dictionaries, I guess. I don't know. Or owner's manuals. um, when you read a poem, or actually, let me give this example. Maybe you've had this experience. There have been times where I've read a poem and I get to the end and I go, I don't get it. And that is more of a left hemisphere attitude about poetry that says there should be a point, there should be a goal, there should be something explicit and clear to me of what's my takeaway, why do I care about this, what was the author's intent, and those things can totally matter, and again the context clearly does matter, right? But when we allow ourselves to just experience the poetry, allow it to, if you will, create worlds within us, I would go ahead and say that that's more in keeping with the spirit of poetry, right? And we're not trying to just pin down one exact, explicit, definite meaning or point to a poem, right? Poetry is so much about the implicit and the context. It's rich. It's rich in a way that, as powerful and as important as definitions are, they're not rich like poetry is. So, with this in mind, we'll turn to our usual 9 or 10-minute meditation here. So, go ahead and settle in, close your eyes, and take a few deep breaths. In meditation and really in the rest of life, it's much trickier to apprehend and gain awareness of the implicit, the context, the peripheral part of our experiencing. But one of the things that we are doing in meditation is actually cultivating a mode of mental being that is more commonly or more frequently engaging with that peripheral, that big picture, and that implicit, contextual part of our experience. And this can happen at so many different levels. But today I'm actually going to invite you to open your eyes back up and maybe pick an object that is across from you, or you can just stare at a spot on the wall. It doesn't really matter. Just find something to be the center point of your attention. And, blink as much as you need to, but without moving your eyes, right? Keep that, whatever object, keep it in the center of your visual field without moving your eyes. try to apprehend more and more what is coming in through the periphery. You don't have to try to go as far as possible, right? It can just be like right here. Boom. It's not a clear line, but for me, it starts to get out of focus. And it's less explicit around here, right? And the blurriness of our peripheral vision is almost more of a metaphor for us today, but a similar thing is at play in your experience in general, right? What we point our attention to, even just our mental energy, that kind of attention, what we think about and ruminate on, that's what is implicit and what we're trying to control. But so much of the richness of life comes from the implicit, the not totally clear, it doesn't have as much detail. But it's still part of our reality. And in meditation, we're essentially practicing sort of our ability to, at will, let go of whatever we're fixated on and trying to control and just re-engage the bigger picture, the large scale perspective. If you're having a good time with your eyes open, feel free to leave them open and keep exploring your experience of your broad visual field. Some people find meditation with eyes open disconcerting or too distracting. So feel free to close your eyes as well. But the same general guidelines for meditation apply whether your eyes are closed or open. You are trying to keep something as a central anchor for your attention. And so anytime you're distracted, whether by something physical that pulls your attention and becomes the center of attention, or distracted by your thought life and you're imagining a scenario, future, past, hypothetical, just anytime you notice distraction, just recenter and engage the biggest, the widest aperture of experience that you are able to. as we wrap up for today, I want to invite you to notice, of course, throughout this week, the implicit. This can be pretty difficult, maybe potentially overwhelming, because it's so hard to define. It's definitionally more difficult to define what is implicit as opposed to what is explicit. So maybe one somewhat straightforward place that you can notice it is when there's silence between people, like a long enough pause in the conversation that it starts to feel awkward. That awkwardness is an experience of sort of a lack of control, because you're becoming aware of all of the other human interaction aspects that you weren't aware of when the conversation was the focus point, right? When there is no longer a clear, obvious focus point, we can re-engage the big picture, and sometimes that's scary. There's a lot more going on than I had realized. Anyway, that's one way you could go about it, or you could do the same eye trick that I was describing. Really, there are so many ways to try to engage our broader, much less detailed, but very powerful big picture awareness that comes from our right hemisphere. All right, that is it for today, my friends. I hope this was helpful, and I wish you well on your journey of developing more self-awareness and self-compassion. If you found this intriguing or bizarre or weird or interesting at all, feel free to share this with some friends who might be developing self-awareness and self-compassion as well. And until next week, know your mind, love your life.